I'm Maya, and this is the story of how my husband thought he could outsmart me. It started with whispers in the dark, bank transactions I never made, and a name, Lena Varro, that I had never heard before. Ethan, my husband, wasn't just planning to leave me. He was planning to take everything, but he underestimated me. He thought I would crumble. Instead, I moved first. I protected what was mine. And 1 week later, his entire plan backfired. What shocked me the most wasn't just the betrayal. It was how long he had been planning it, how many lies he had told, and the lengths he was willing to go to destroy me. I woke up to an empty bed. The cold sheets beside me told me Ethan had been gone for a while. At first, I thought maybe he had gone to the bathroom or grabbed a glass of water. But as I sat up, rubbing the sleep from my eyes, I caught the faint sound of his voice. Low, hushed, careful. The hallway light was off, but a sliver of moonlight streamed through the window, casting shadows across the floor. My stomach twisted as I followed the sound. Just a little longer. She doesn't suspect anything yet, I heard him whisper. I stopped mid-step. My breath hitched. Ethan's voice was smooth, reassuring, like he was calming someone down. My heart pounded against my ribs. Who was he talking to? I stood there, straining to hear more, but the words that followed were muffled. His tone dropped to barely above a whisper. This wasn't some late-night work call. Ethan never whispered on work calls. Hell, he never even cared if I overheard him before. My mind raced through possibilities, each one worse than the last. After a few seconds, I heard his footsteps approaching. I barely had time to dart back to the bedroom before he rounded the corner. My pulse hammered as I slid under the covers, feigning sleep. A moment later, I felt the bed dip. His weight shifted beside me, but I kept my breathing steady. A few minutes passed, and then he exhaled slowly, relaxed, like nothing had happened. I turned over, blinking up at him. Where were you? My voice came out soft, groggy, like I had just woken up. Bathroom, he muttered without hesitation. A lie. I caught the faint vibration of his phone a few seconds later. Another call. Ethan barely flinched. Just a client, he said later, smoothing over some details for a case, but I knew better. The next morning, I woke up before Ethan. He was still asleep, his arm draped across the pillow where my head should have been. I slipped quietly out of bed, careful not to wake him, and padded barefoot to the kitchen. Normally, I didn't check our bank accounts. Ethan handled most of the finances, and I had never thought much of it, but something felt off. I scrolled through the recent transactions, my stomach tightened. $500, $1,200, $750, $2,000, a dozen withdrawals over the past 3 months, small amounts individually, but frequent enough to raise red flags. None were for bills, utilities, or investments we had discussed. My hands trembled around the phone. Footsteps sounded behind me. I spun, locking the screen just as Ethan appeared in the doorway, rubbing his neck. Morning, he mumbled, voice thick with sleep. What's for breakfast? I set my phone down, trying to steady myself. I was about to ask you the same thing, I said. He smirked, stepping forward to pour coffee. Guess it's your turn then, he said. His free hand rested casually on the counter, but I noticed the slight tension in his fingers. I glanced at the bank account again. Ethan froze for a fraction of a second, just long enough for his grip to tighten around the mug, before forcing a chuckle. Just small investments, he said lightly. Short-term gains, nothing to worry about. I crossed my arms. There are a lot of withdrawals I don't recognize. He nodded slowly, still smiling, but his eyes flickered for just a second. Just business opportunities, he replied, smooth as ever. I knew he was lying, I just didn't know why yet. The rest of the day, unease settled like a weight on my chest. Ethan glued himself to his phone, screens face down, taking calls in another room. Every time I looked at him, I felt a wall between us that hadn't been there before. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind wouldn't stop racing. Ethan had always been confident, smooth, a man who could talk his way out of anything. But I had been with him long enough to know when something was off, and something was definitely off. I turned to face him, already asleep beside me. His breathing was steady, his face calm, like a man with nothing to hide. But I wasn't convinced. A voice in my head whispered the words I had tried to ignore all day. Am I being paranoid, or is something really wrong? The doubt refused to fade. Even as morning light filtered through the window, I had spent the entire night tossing and turning, unable to shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. And then, as if confirming my fears, I saw it. A notification on his phone, blinking faintly on the coffee table. I froze. The name on the screen, Lena Var. My chest tightened. My pulse raced. Who was she? And what did Ethan mean by the message I glimpsed? Make sure she stays in the dark. Almost there. I pressed my fingers against the counter, my mind spinning. I knew then, with a clarity that left no room for doubt, Ethan was hiding something massive, something that could ruin me if I didn't act fast. I spent the morning pretending everything was normal, moving through the motions of breakfast, coffee, and emails. But my mind was elsewhere, locked onto the withdrawals. The strange name, the whispered words from the night before. Something was very wrong, and I had to know exactly what. I slipped back to the kitchen when Ethan went into the office. My fingers hovered over the phone as I reopened our account. The withdrawals had been small enough to fly under the radar individually, but together they told a story. Almost every week for the past 3 months, money had been quietly siphoned out. None of it for bills, groceries, or even the joint savings we had talked about. Each number tightened the knot in my stomach. $500, $1,200, $750. Each one a silent accusation. My pulse raced as I traced them back, noting the recipient names. None of them I recognized. None of them were what we had ever discussed as investments or business opportunities. I felt a flicker of hope, then panic. Maybe I was wrong, I told myself. Maybe it's just some work thing, some new venture he hasn't told me about. But deep down, I knew better. Footsteps approached, and I quickly locked the screen. Ethan appeared in the doorway, rubbing his neck, still half asleep. Morning, he said casually. What's going on? I tried to keep my voice calm. Nothing, I said, forcing a smile, though my stomach churned. He nodded, pouring coffee, and for a second I almost believed him. Almost. But then I remembered the phone, the whispered words, the transactions, and I realized this wasn't about money he was investing. This was about control. By evening, I had pieced together enough to understand the scope of what he was planning. Ethan wasn't just taking money quietly, he was planning to claim everything we had built together. My condo, my savings, even my personal accounts. Everything would be consolidated under his name. He had spent months mapping it out. Every detail calculated, every moment rehearsed. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from anger. How could the man I had trusted so completely think he could pull this off? How could he be so blind to the fact that I wasn't naive? I decided then, if he wanted a war, he would get one. But the first move had to be mine. I contacted my attorney, quietly moved my assets into accounts he couldn't touch, and made sure every last bit of what was mine was safe. And all the while, Ethan continued to act like nothing was wrong. He laughed at the TV, scrolled through his phone, and even suggested ordering takeout. The casual confidence in his movements, the ease with which he tried to keep up the charade, made my skin crawl. He didn't know, not yet, and I intended to keep it that way, until the moment I had him exactly where I wanted to be. That evening, I waited until Ethan was distracted, his attention glued to the TV, laughing at something I barely registered. My heart pounded as I retrieved the documents I had quietly organized throughout the day. Every account, every transfer, every hidden move he had made. It was all laid bare in front of me. I poured a glass of wine and sat across from him at the kitchen table, my hands resting lightly on the papers. Ethan glanced up, smiling that same calculated smile, completely unaware that I already knew. "Everything okay?" he asked casually, reaching for his coffee. I tilted my head slightly, letting the weight of silence stretch between us. "I've been thinking," I said slowly, carefully, "about our finances, about everything." His smile faltered, just for a second. A twitch. That was all it took. I slid the first page toward him. Legal jargon sprawled across it. But the last page made it clear. Ethan had planned to consolidate every asset under his name. My condo, my savings, even joint investments, All of it. I watched him closely. Every flicker of expression, every micro-reaction. This is your idea of protection? I asked, my voice steady but cold. It's just precaution, he said smoothly. Nothing changes between us. I lifted my gaze, locking eyes with him. Nothing changes? You want me to sign over everything, not just the joint stuff, Ethan. Everything I worked for? He leaned back, arms crossed, trying to maintain his composure. It's just paperwork, Maya. Just consolidating things in case. His words trailed off, almost a warning, almost a threat. My hands curled slightly around the edge of the table. Not from fear, but fury. This wasn't paranoia anymore. This was real. He had been planning this, thinking he could manipulate me, and he hadn't expected me to see through it. I'm not signing this, I said calmly, letting the weight of my words hang in the air. He laughed, short and sharp, almost dismissive. You really don't want to do this, Maya, he said, leaning closer. His voice dropped, careful and low. Think about it. This could get messy. I met his gaze, unflinching. Is that a threat, Ethan? He paused, expression unreadable. The smirk he had worn moments ago faded into something harder, colder. You're making this harder than it needs to be, he said finally. I smiled, just enough to unsettle him, and stood. Gathering the documents, I placed them neatly on the counter. You've underestimated me, I said quietly. I've moved everything. And you've lost before the first battle even began. The realization hit him like a silent blow. I saw the tightening in his jaw, the sharp inhale that betrayed his composure. Months of plotting, months of lies, all unraveling in a single moment. He tried to mask it, a cold smile returning, but it couldn't hide the truth. I was in control now. The next morning, I woke with a strange calm. Ethan walked past me in the kitchen, coffee in hand, acting like nothing had changed. But everything had. I had the documents, I had proof, and for the first time in months, I felt the power shift. I called my attorney, Julia, and laid everything out. The withdrawals, the mysterious transfers, the hidden accounts, and the attempt to consolidate my assets under Ethan's name. She listened quietly, her expression unreadable, before speaking. Maya, he doesn't stand a chance, she said finally. Legally, he has no access to what you moved. This is airtight. I exhaled, slowly. But I knew the battle wasn't over. Men like Ethan don't walk away quietly. And sure enough, within days, the first legal move came. He filed a motion for a forensic audit of all my accounts, claiming I had mismanaged joint funds. I stayed calm. Julia reviewed the motion, flipping through pages with a smirk. This is desperation, she said. He's trying to intimidate you, hoping you'll react emotionally. Don't give him that satisfaction. We counterfile, request dismissal, and demand he pay all legal fees. I nodded, gripping my coffee mug tightly. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about showing him he couldn't manipulate me, that I wasn't some naive woman to be outsmarted. 2 weeks later, the courtroom was tense, silent, except for the low murmur of lawyers. Ethan sat across from me, perfectly dressed, smirk in place, thinking this was his moment. His lawyer presented the case first, claiming irregularities, hinting that I had hidden funds. I didn't flinch. Julia stood, confident, precise, and methodical. She laid out every transfer, every account, every move I had made before he even filed for divorce. The court finds no grounds for a full financial audit, the judge declared. The motion is denied. Furthermore, Ms. Gray will be responsible for all legal fees associated with this claim. I felt a rush of satisfaction, but I didn't gloat. Ethan walked past me without a word, muttering just loud enough, "This isn't over." I let him go, let him think he still had a chance. Because I knew better. I had already won the first crucial battle. But I also knew the war wasn't over. Men like him don't quit. They strategize, regroup, and come back with something even worse. And Ethan, he had been planning this too long to walk away quietly. The following morning, my phone rang. It was Julia, her voice tight but controlled. "Maya, there's a new problem." My stomach dropped. "What now?" "Ethan and that Lee Navarro, they've filed a formal complaint," she said, "accusing you of falsifying financial records. They claim you've been laundering money and hiding funds for months. I pressed my fingers to my temple, fighting panic. If the accusation stuck, I could face legal consequences far worse than losing money. Are the documents real? I asked, my voice trembling slightly. Doctored, Julia confirmed. But they didn't notice one key detail. The accounts those transfers supposedly came from didn't even exist at the time. That mistake will destroy their case. A rush of adrenaline replaced the fear. I smiled grimly. Ethan thought he had me cornered. But he had left a trail of evidence that would undo him. I spent the day with Julia and our forensic analyst preparing the motion to prove the documents fraudulent and filing a countersuit for defamation and falsifying legal evidence. Every detail was precise. Every number, timestamp, and forged transfer exposed. 2 weeks later, the courtroom was packed. Ethan sat across from me, tense, jaw tight. Julia presented our case with perfect clarity. The forensic analyst explained each falsified document, every manipulated number. Ethan's lawyers squirmed, realizing they had no defense. Finally, Julia placed a folder in front of the judge. Your Honor, in light of these fraudulent accusations, my client is countersuing Mr. Gray and Lee Navarro for defamation and submission of falsified legal evidence. The courtroom was silent, the weight of the truth settling like a hammer. Ethan's jaw clenched, his face pale. His lawyer whispered frantically, but there was nothing left to save. The judge nodded. Motion dismissed. Ethan was responsible for all legal costs, completely, utterly defeated. As I walked out of the courthouse, I didn't need to say a word. I let him pass, just far enough, and whispered, "We're done here." For the first time in months, I felt at peace. No more threats, no more sleepless nights, no more waking in the dark, wondering what Ethan had planned. I had won, not with fire or chaos, but with strategy, calm and foresight. Later that evening, I sat on my balcony, looking out at the city lights stretching endlessly into the horizon. Everything felt different. I was no longer the woman who ignored the warning signs. I was stronger. I was clear. I was free. Life has a way of testing us, often when we least expect it. Betrayal can hit hard, but it doesn't define us. How we rise after the fall does. That night, I raised a glass of wine to myself, to strength, to clarity, to freedom. I whispered into the night, "This is my story now." And for the first time in a long time, it was mine entirely. Thank you for listening.